We still only have 2/3, but because mine's on a Mac, so I'm just going to talk from here. You have to squint, but mine are just little fun slides. They're not anything. Theirs have more detail. So I'm John Diana. I'm one of the researchers, or I'm the research director, really. I'm actually not much of a researcher. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, but Marty Hoffman, who's the longtime research director, stepped down about a year ago, and they need somebody to help out. So I volunteered for the position to do that, and I'm just kind of coordinating. I do have some friends that are good researchers, so we've been getting them involved in the various studies, and so just to let you know about what we do. The research that Western States has, it's a long-standing race with a board, so it's a lot bigger race with a lot more help along the way. There's it's a foundation, so it's a nonprofit organization, and people have donated to the research for a long time to support the various research projects. They're generally done on a shoestring budget. You don't need a ton of money for these research projects. They can vary from looking at things like hyponatremia, which is something that Marty Hoffman's sort of the world expert on now, and most of his research was done through his own work in Western States funding, and in fact he's came up with a variety of things like understanding that weight didn't always have much to do with hyponatremia, which is low sodium, which can be a serious condition in these ultra running races. In fact, it's probably one of the only things that's one of the more serious things that one can acquire, during the race, because you can go unconscious and be in the ICU for it. Also, it led to better knowledge of how to treat it. Most people just give normal saline, which is what you give like when you see people getting an IV or an athlete, which normally is fine, but if you're hyponatremic, that can actually make it worse. So although you rehydrate the person, you actually make their hyponatremia worse, and he figured out that, or he and his colleagues, that actually even 3% saline, which is a higher concentration, slowly would help to correct this more safely. So a lot of really good research has been done by Western States, and in fact, if you look at the number of papers that have been done on ultra running, which are a low number, relative to, say, triathlons, marathons, and things like that, so like literally in the under 200 number, they're something like 40 to 50% of them have actually been done through some portion of Western States research. So it's a really important aspect of the race. And it's been very well, it's been something that has been supported for a long time. So I got involved just actually because I read Jason Koop's book on training on ultra running, and in it was one page where it said, "Get involved if you can." And I thought, well, that's something I could probably do and help out. And so that's how I got to have him come and talk. And Tracy, this is Tracy Hoeg. She's works with Bob Weiss, who is our medical director. And they have been doing several studies over like 3 years now.
This is my fourth year.
Fourth year, yeah. And this is the second year of the Metabolomics study, which she's going to explain. This big word, I'm going to have her talk. And just so you know how smart she is, she lived in Denmark. She and her husband moved to Denmark, and she had to take the medical boards or some boarded thing in Danish, and had 6 weeks, learned Danish in 6 weeks, and took a medical test. So, I mean, come on, I took a year of Spanish and I can say hola, it's ridiculous. So, and I'd like to give a special thanks to, our researchers, which include Dr. Marco Boder, who I recruited up here from Napa, who took, time off work. He was seeing patients until 7 o'clock last night in Napa, drove up here and then did ultrasounds all day, and is still doing them until 7 at night. So he's right here. So we appreciate his free time, he's giving to us. And obviously Tracy Hoeg and Bob Weiss, who have been doing these things for a few years now. There's Bob. You want to stand up real quick, and you can see Tracy. So, and Don Zay, I don't know if he's here. He's kind of my liaison to the Western States Board, and he's been helping me get things along. I'd also like to thank the Philips people. So those ultrasound machines are expensive, and they're really nice, and we got the two of the newest ones, and the Philips people just brought them over, letting us use them for the study. So that's really been helpful. And Michael Paxson and Allie are two people that are reps. So I'd like to just thank them. And most importantly, we want to thank the participants. You know, we had so many people volunteer that we actually had to say, you know, we don't have enough space, which turned out Marco was twice as fast as I thought. We probably could have done him. So if I did say that to you, you may come anytime and he can probably knock it out if you're interested in getting your hip ultrasounded, which we've been doing all day. So
I'm all about spontaneity, so if anybody wants to have just pile on in, we'll do it.
yeah, exactly. And we've been doing a little fun ones too, right? So with that, I'm going to let Tracy just talk about her metabolomics study. We'll have Jason talk about like a coach's perspective, maybe some practical things for you even in a couple days. And then I'll just do a 1 minute close. So
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for coming and being interested in the research here. I just wanted, I'm going to go over to my slides so I can turn it to, but I just wanted to say that the research that is done at Western States is not only being used to help runners and save runners' lives, but it's being used to understand just in general how human physiology works and how fatigue works, and hyponatremia was a perfect example. And I want to say that the second year that I was here, we had a participant that started to have seizures from hyponatremia. I don't know how many of you guys were here, but in the old days, we would have probably given him the wrong treatment, maybe killed him, probably landed him for a long stay in the hospital, but gave him 3% hypertonic saline, you know, maybe saved his life. He was fine. He came back to run the next year and did great. And so it's amazing. This race is an amazing opportunity for researchers and for medical people to see sort of research in action, saving people's lives and changing the way that we do things. And we would not know any of this if it weren't for all the runners who participate in these studies, and also for the funding support that we receive from the Western States Board. So it's really, really exciting to be involved in this. And I'm going to walk over to my computer now so I can turn the slides. But it's true that I did move here actually from Denmark just 2 years ago. And this picture was taken the first time I was here for the study working with Marty Hoffman, and my friend Jacques took this picture. This is from above Robinson Flat, and we just could not believe what an incredible place this was here in the Sierra Nevada, and what an incredible race this was. And it led to my family moving here. I'm originally from Wisconsin, but participating in this race and working on the research completely changed the trajectory of my life and my family's life. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the metabolomics study that we're going to be doing this year. But first, I just want to show, so this is a study that we were setting up the scales for when we used to get everyone's weight. We don't do that anymore because of the research that we did. We now know that weight doesn't necessarily correspond with your sodium level, and people lose weight, and we're not going to pull anyone anymore. We don't do weights like that anymore, but we were setting up for the scales then just for a research study. And the first study that I did with Marty Hoffman was, on vision loss in ultramarathon runners. And I'm just measuring intraocular pressure here, but not going to talk about that study. If anyone's interested in that, we can talk about that afterwards. But you can move on to the next slide. And then these are just, you know, to show that you guys have so much fun out there running these races, and it's so cool to work with research participants like the racers in this race. So you can, and that was from a continuous EKG study that we did while runners were running, and then that was the same year they swallowed a pill, and we looked at core body temperature throughout the race. And then you can move to the next slide. So I'm just going to give a quick talk about ultramarathon performance. I know Jason, or just background, just briefly, and then talk about the metabolomics study that we're going to be doing this year. We started it last year, and then we're going to be hoping to finish what we started this year. And then there are a bunch of people working on the study from UC Davis, from Emory, from Stanford. I think I've got it covered. Oh, and from Virginia. So very grateful for their help. And so the reason that we started this study, and this is all Bob Weiss's idea, and I'm very glad that he's here, because we have to give him credit for coming up with the idea for this study, was to figure out why some ultramarathon runners perform better than others. I think maybe you guys know who these people are. Jim Wamsley, Killian Jornet, Camille Herron, and Casey Lichtyke, who is Jason's athlete that he trains. Okay, go ahead, go on. So actually I was gonna say, if you go back to that slide, I think if you ask people who are not ultramarathon runners, they say that it's like something genetic, that these people were born to be able to run these distances that well. And if you ask the athletes, they'll say, you are not giving me credit for my hard work and my training. So I think we want to get down to the true story here. So if you look just at research that looks at things that contribute to long distance running performance, this is kind of the traditional dogma and the things that are backed by research. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, because I think you guys know about a lot of these things, and you can move to the next slide. I just like to mention a few things that people tend to overlook, which I really like. Pregnancy, kind of like heat training, increases your plasma volume, and also has been shown to increase your VO2 max for 20 years after you're pregnant if you run during your pregnancy. And then the COL5A1 gene is something that's kind of new that's been found that is correlated with ultramarathon performance. And it has to do with how we lay down fibrillin, and it's associated with being less flexible, but actually if you're totally inflexible, you are not a good runner, and if you're too flexible, you're not good either. So the story of that hasn't been completely elucidated yet. You can move on to the next slide. So just to give make a brief point here about women are actually not faster than men in ultramarathons. I know that that's something that people tend to think, but I love statistics, and I just kind of looked at the men versus women last year, and this is the median finish time, and so women were slower than men, and younger age is significantly correlated with faster finishing times. I just took these right from the results from last year, and then if you can move along. And then I just kind of was like, I'm just going to look at the world record for all the top performances of all different distances, male versus female. So contrary to what most people think, actually in ultra distances, women tend to get comparatively worse compared to men, rather than actually closer to men's performance, which I thought was interesting. I feel like that's not something that most people believe, but this kind of tells the story. But there's also greater variation as you get out into the longer distances, because there are not as many participants. You can move to the next slide. And so, I don't know if you guys know Guillaume Millet, and then Marty Hoffman, and someone that I don't know, Lauren, have been trying to explain what's different about ultra running performance compared to long distance running performance in general. And they've added some things like muscle mass and resistance to fatigue with the neuromuscular activation there, and then psychological factors. I think everyone knows that plays a role when you're out there running for 24 hours or more. And then GI problems comes into play maybe a little bit more. And then I kind of added, there's this whole thing about fueling and ability to mobilize fat stores and adequate fuel to meet the demands of your muscle that I think really hasn't been fully explored yet. So, go to the next slide. So metabolomics is a way of looking at a person's phenotype at a given moment. So it's a way of actually looking at what's going on in the body right here and now, based on what you've eaten, what medications you're taking, what kind of training you've been doing. It looks at 10,000 to 100,000 different metabolites or chemicals in your blood, as compared to like genomics, where you're looking at just genes, which may or may not be used depending on epigenetic factors and whether or not your body is getting the signal to transcribe those genes. So with genes, you're not really getting the whole story of what's happening in your body at that moment. So move on to the next slide. I guess I kind of already already explained this with how you go from DNA to RNA, which makes proteins, and then from these proteins you get all the metabolites that are in your body. And then you can move to the next slide. And the number of metabolites goes up from the number of genes. And then go on to the next slide. And people say that it's kind of like, I know we always say this, but this is what people have been saying recently, that it's like the final frontier of medicine. And right now it's being used to understand how everything works. Like in Bob's lab, he looks at the metabolomics of renal cell carcinoma. And it's being used in newborn screening right now. It's being used to develop drugs to target specific metabolites, but I'm not going to get into too much detail about this. I would just want you guys to know this is being used very widely in medicine right now. Go on to the next slide. So last year, the specific aims of our study were to identify metabolites and metabolic processes to separate the first from the last finishers at Western states. And then we're going to try to figure out what those metabolites and processes mean for endurance performance, and then correlate those with a post-race questionnaire that we did last year. And so what we did last year was considered discovery metabolomics, where we have all these potential metabolites, and then we're just going to identify the ones that are significantly different from the fastest to the slowest runners. And so this is what we actually collected urine pre-race last year, and then we collected blood post-race on 39 total people out of the 45 who finished. And just move it. And so from our, that's okay, that's totally fine. From our questionnaire data, we found that faster finish times at Western states last year were correlated most strongly with fastest marathon, personal record, more miles run per week, fastest 5K PR, and lower body mass index, in that order. And then finishing times were not significantly associated with number of ultramarathons run. Now that might have been because there were older participants who were changing that, and then the percent carbohydrates in the diet leading up to the race, the month leading up to the race, was not significantly correlated. And then, so these names and numbers are not going to mean anything to you guys, but the blue ones, this is an example of a metabolomics readout, and the blue circles are the molecules that were significantally higher in the faster runners. And they're all types of phospholipids. In the PC, they're all types of phosphatidylcholines. So you can go on. And then we just got the idea, well, what if it's just that men produce more of these than women, and that's all that we're finding. But actually, women tend to produce more than men. So it was not just because it was men that were producing them. Women actually produce more related molecules, so there was actually no overlap between the two. So go on. And then there was no obvious correlation with those phosphatidylcholine levels in age, supplement intake, or self-reported diet. So we couldn't explain it by what the runners were eating or their supplements. So go on. And then, so 26 of the 29 were found to be phosphatidylcholines. And then, you can move on. And then just kind of, we started looking through the literature, and it was interesting to note that so related phosphatidylcholines actually go down in neuromuscular diseases such as Huntington's disease. And so these are the same related chemicals that go up in the faster runners. So we started to think, well, maybe we're onto something that's like a bigger picture here. So move along. And then phosphatidylcholine is actually how 95% of choline and acetylcholine are stored in the tissues. And so it's phosphatidylcholine can be broken down into choline and acetylcholine, which if you move on are very important with, this is the neuromuscular junction. So this is how our nerves communicate with our muscles and tell them to contract. So if you run out of acetylcholine and choline, you get tired, and you also get diseases like myasthenia gravis, if you guys have heard of that. So we don't know if what we're finding has anything to do with this, but these are possible theories. You can move on. And then, I don't have to go through all this, but choline has been found to be performance enhancing in people who are deficient in it, and people who run marathons, 40% of them have a reduction in plasma choline. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then this was just from a previous study at Western States where they found like an increase in creatinine kinase, and think that the increase in creatinine kinase, the CK, that has also been found to be associated with developing, so this is associated with rhabdo and also kidney injury that could be related to not having enough choline. But that's something that we may actually be able to look at this year, and this was something that was presented at the ACSM conference that I thought was pretty interesting. So, go on. And then, so our theory, and this is all just theoretical right now, is that these phosphatidylcholines are maybe being regulated by this PPAR delta, which is a transcription factor that is activated in exercise and has a lot of health benefits. And so this PPAR delta, if you take mice that have a constitutively activated or agonized PPAR delta, they're able to just like run twice as long as rats or mice that don't have that. So I actually show that in the next picture. And so this just shows, I'm sorry, mice. So this just shows that even if the mice are completely sedentary and you activate this PPAR delta, they like run twice as far before they fall over in fatigue. I like picturing how they do that experiment. I just wanted to I was not involved in that one. All right, you can move on. And so this just kind of describes how PPAR delta works. And again, these are all just theories, and PPAR delta is, this is not all theories. This has been shown that PPAR delta plays a part in fatty acid oxidation and helps muscles to contract properly and suppresses inflammation. These are all known benefits of exercise as well, with the inflammation especially. And so this year, again, well, you can skip this, we've been through this already. And then, so what we're doing now is we're going to be actually looking at these phosphatidylcholine species in the lab in muscle cells, and we're going to try to simulate exercise with this molecule called ICAR, and we're going to see what these phosphatidylcholines do. Because when you do these discovery metabolomics, you find these new molecules that haven't really been described before, so we're just going to try and figure out what the molecules do, and then move on to the next one. And then, so then we're going to be doing a study this year that probably some of you are going to be participating in, where we're going to determine if those same molecules are elevated also pre-race. Is this something that develops over the course of the race? So we're going to be measuring blood before and after, and it's just a very, very small amount of blood, just less than 1 cc that we need. And so we've been really excited that racers have been willing to give up a little bit of their blood before the race. And then correlate that with some basic labs like CPK, sodium, hemoglobin, glucose, as well as choline. And so this will be more of a targeted assay this year. So that's what we're going to be working on this year, and determine if, sort of validate what we found last year, if this was just all a fluke and it was all nothing, or if this is a true story that's going on here. I think that, can we move on to the next one? So I talked about how much blood we're going to be, and we're going to have 55 runners that we're going to include this year at the start. And can we go on to the next slide? And I just wanted to say thank you. These are the officers of the Western States Board or Foundation, and then thanks to, obviously, John Diana for inviting me to talk. Thank you so much. And thanks to you guys, all the volunteers, researchers, and runners. Appreciate it.
So now we'll just have Jason Koop give you the coach's perspective of things. And then I'll just do a couple quick closing remarks after.
You actually gave me a really good email.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't know. So I'm never the biggest fan of giving training talks before a race. First off, how many people are running on Saturday? Raise your hand real quick. And leave your hand up if this is your first Western States. So congratulations, you guys. Good job. I know a lot of you guys have been waiting years and years and years and years to get into this race in particular, and it's a big day Saturday. But anyway, the biggest reason I really don't like giving training talks 2 days before a race is because there's not a whole lot you can do. So I'm kind of not the most functional person in the room right now. But what I want to go over is a little bit of what John and Tracy have already touched on. And then I'm just going to give some really practical tips that you guys can utilize on Saturday that will not interfere with any plans that you've already made. This is me starting to become involved with Western States is a story that's really become full circle. The first ultramarathon runner that I ever worked with, and this is back in 2004, was training for the Western States 100. And his name was Jim Huffman, and he's still a great friend of mine. He was fourth one year, you remember Jim. And he's still a great friend of mine. But previous to working with Jim, I worked with a wide variety of athletes. I worked with runners and cyclists and triathletes and mountain bikers, MMA fighters, downhill skiers, professional hockey players, dog trainers, you name it, we worked with them. And I always considered that a very fortunate turning point in my coaching career because it forced me to work with athletes that I had no idea anything about their sport. I'm not a professional MMA fighter. Never stepped in the octagon before, despite what you guys might think. But because of working with all those different athletes, it allowed me to develop a framework that I've used throughout my coaching career. And it's a very simple framework, and it should make sense to a lot of people. But I think, unfortunately, in ultramarathon running and ultramarathon coaching, we've developed this bad habit of just passing down information from one generation to the next. So what I would do whenever I started working with a new athlete is I would simply look at the demands of the sport. What's the intensity? How long is the sport? What systems are they activating? How are they going to be fatigued? All those things that Tracy showed earlier in that distance running chart, we would take into consideration from the very, very get-go with working with an athlete. And then once we looked at those demands, we would look at how we were going to ready the athlete for those demands. Those were the two fundamental steps that we would take when we were working with any athlete. And it didn't matter whether I knew anything about the sport or not. The underpinnings of finding information in both of those areas really has to do with research. And it's research that you can do on the course, research you can do on elevation gain, elevation loss, how the body adapts to heat, how the body adapts to altitude. When you get punched in the head, what actually happens. All of those things had great research framework to pull from. And so even though I did not have any sort of sport background in a lot of the sports I was working with, I could successfully work with a wide variety of athletes by simply doing my homework and doing good research. But when I started working with ultramarathon runners, this is in 2004, and the date on this is actually really important. This is in 2004. I went through that same process of I wanted to find the demands of the event first, and then look at ways that I could ready the athlete for those demands. And in ultramarathon running, there was a big, giant hole. Whereas in normal running, and I can always say that in an ultramarathon crowd, I can say normal running and people kind of get it. I say it in another audience and people don't really understand what that means. But in normal running, those demands are quite well known, and Tracy actually showed that on one of her slides. We know that the velocity that you can run at is a function of the fraction of VO2 max that you can utilize and the cost of running, how much oxygen it takes to move a given distance. Everybody that was captivated by the Nike sub 2 hour project that just went on, you guys watch that? Everybody watch that? That's all the eggheads were trying to maximize. Those two simple variables, fraction of VO2 max that you can achieve during the event and how to lower the cost of running to the utmost. But in ultramarathon running, there was this big gap. There was this big gap of information, and I could hardly find anything in 2004 to help this athlete run the Western States 100. And so I largely had to come up with a lot of educated guesses. And I remember very vividly sitting down with my little yellow legal pad and drawing a stick figure that kind of looked like this. And this is a figure from the book that was recently published. And I call it my owie diagram. And what that means is everything that's going to hurt after the end of the Western States 100. So that's what you guys can get forward to looking, or you guys can look forward to actually feeling all of this. But as crude as that exercise was, it gave me the initial part of the framework for how to actually coach this athlete. I could look at it and say, you know what? I can figure out how to get this athlete better so they can deal with the cardiovascular stress. I can draw on research in other areas and figure out strategies that I can employ with the athlete to reduce the mechanical stress in their joints. We can figure out how to develop training strategies that will alleviate the GI stress on the athlete. But in full admission, and I've told this athlete since then, 90% of this is educated guessing. Meaning I was taking stabs at the dark with a lot of training strategies, which I honestly don't like to do as a coach. I like to have a very good pathway and a very good framework to work from. When I say you're going to do this and it's going to produce this adaptation, you have to know exactly what you're doing. But this was 2004, and I used that framework for a good 7 or 8 years with ultramarathon athletes, continually trying to find better and better and better research that I could then utilize to coach with athletes. Can you get the next one? It says table 4.1. So fast forward to 2011, and Hoffman and Fogard did a study here at the Western States 100, and they basically asked the same question that I was asking myself with my silly little stick figure, is what goes owie? Except they were asking it across hundreds of runners at the Western States 100 and at Rio del Lago. And this is the list that they came up with. And much to my, I don't know, surprise, maybe I could take a little bit of credit for it, but much to my surprise, a lot of it was very similar to my initial stick figure, meaning the athletes were saying, these are the things that are affecting me during the race that impact my performance. And I'm not going to go through all of these. But to me, it was a watershed moment when this research came out for 2 reasons. First, it somewhat validated the framework that I had used for the last 7 or 8 years, which is always nice to have because I no longer felt like I was completely guessing. Now I was just somewhat guessing. But the second part took a little bit of a keen eye, and I actually had to read and reread the research until this revelation came to me. One of the most striking things in this survey, and just to set this whole thing up, all Marty was asking are, what are the problems that are impacting your race performance? And he's dividing this between finishers and non-finishers. So if you can imagine, and I participated in this study myself, when you cross the finish line, they would ask you, okay, what hurts? And they gave you a list to choose from, and you could choose all of them or you could choose none of them. And as you guys can see, based on the percentage breakdown, some people chose multiple things. But after I sat down and I looked at this for a few times through my coaching lens, one of the things that was most shocking to me is that only 13.5% of the finishers and 15.5% of the non-finishers were citing the fact that they were inadequately trained as a reason that impacted their race performance. Yet, a greater percentage said that they were inadequately heat acclimatized, they somehow experienced exhaustion, there was muscle pain, there was nausea and vomiting, and they had blisters or hot spots, there was muscle cramping, some sort of injury during the race, some sort of illness before the race, they started out too fast, vision problems, difficulty to blow, on and on. Through my coaching lens, I view almost all of those, almost, not all, but almost all of them as things you can train. And so what I think of when I research this, or when I read this, is that the athletes don't understand what is trainable and what is not. And that goes back to my original framework, looking at the demands of the event and trying to determine strategies that will ready the athlete for those demands. But this was a watershed moment because we can now get a better fix on what the demands actually are. The next step for Tracy and John, this is what I'm going to encourage them to do, is to peel apart how to actually ready the athletes for these specific demands. And I would say in the last, it's 2017 right now, so in the last 6 years, we're starting to come up with better answers for a lot of these. We know that there's a high degree of neuromuscular fatigue in ultramarathon running. That's starting to show over just even the past 2 or 3 years of research. We're not quite sure how to actually make athletes better to combat that. Those are the answers that we're going to continually peel back and try to find. And so I applaud some of the work that John and Tracy has done here and that Western States has done, because personally it's made my job a whole lot easier as a coach, because I have a better framework to work off of. But also, and more importantly, the athletes are better served. They're most best served in some of the examples that Tracy gave. We saved a life, right? The researchers and the physicians literally saved a life because of the research that's been done. That's a goal that's far beyond anything that I could do as a coach to improve somebody's time by an hour, although I like improving people's times by an hour. But those are the literal outcomes of research like this. It's not just because we want to know things and we want to poke and prod you and get ultrasounds on your hip before a race. There are very practical outcomes of all of the research that comes out of this kind of stuff. So that's the big picture of how some of this performance can actually impact what we do day to day in training. That doesn't have anything to do with what you guys can do on Saturday to actually improve your performance. So I'm going to give you guys 2 really simple takeaways that if you're running on Saturday, you can put in bed and you can incorporate them in your plan. One is rest. I don't want to see anybody up on the escarpment tomorrow scouting out where all the down trees are and where the snow line starts and any of that. I'll be up there having fun. You guys should be sitting in bed. So that's the first one, is rest. And then the second one actually is accentuated in this year because it's going to be very hot. Keep yourselves cool. And keep yourselves really, really cool. Fight the heat like you're in the cage with it. I use a lot of fighting analogies. But fight the heat like you're in the cage with it and go to war with it. Treat it like an interval or a hill or any sort of other physical thing that you can tackle, because it is battling the heat. It is a big thing. And for the 90% of you guys that aren't trying to win this race and are trying to finish and have a great experience, that is one of the major things that can completely unravel your day, is just simply getting too hot. So do everything you can to keep your temperature cool. Ice, water, water, and ice, and warm water, and stream crossings that have cold water in them. There's going to be a lot of them out there. Even the snow, when you guys start to get into the canyons, you can grab just a little bit of last bit of snow before it starts getting hot and stuff it in your shirt. Have a bottle just for spraying yourself down. It would be very hard for you to cool down too much on Saturday. So rest and stay cool. And I guess I'll add a third one. Go and have fun. This is it. Don't forget that. This is a really cool race. I mentioned at the very beginning, a lot of you guys have been waiting 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get into this race, and to cross the finish line of this one is quite special. You guys will get to see how special it is on Saturday. Thank you guys.
So there's, we really appreciate the talks. That was really good. So you got some specifics, you got some generalities, and you got some tips. And so I hope you enjoyed it. last word just is that, you know, we're going to start this research it's not, we really make a lot out of or our research, I should say, because I'm not the researcher really, but, you know, make a lot out of each dollar that we get. And it is a nonprofit organization. So if anybody, we're going to start a fundraising campaign starting now, actually. And we just put up on our website a little donate button under the research. And so if anybody was so inclined to give anything, it really helps. The money will be really well spent on the research studies. You can write it off on your taxes for those of you who need that. And we're going to post whoever, you know, puts anything, you know, in on the website, you know, as we do the fundraising campaign. And no matter what you do, don't tell my wife this, but I'm going to match the first $5,000 that comes in for, you know, through this fundraising campaign. So I hope that, you know, you're feeling fine.
So don't tell my wife this either, but I'll match the next 1,000. We really appreciate it, and like I said, these dollars go a long way to do these studies, so you can figure out how not to get that, and that, more practically speaking. And just to finish up, if you have any questions, we'll do like a little quick 5-minute question and answer, and obviously you can come up afterward. Any questions any of us could answer for you? I know you waited a long time with the AV, so.
Besides the obvious for the heat, because that's on everybody's mind, what are some of the key cues that you have that you tell your racers? When you start feeling like X, do this.
Oh, you mean as crew, like when they're coming
in?
in?
But you as a coach, you know, in terms of helping your athletes, you know, deal with heat.
In terms of how to monitor it?
Right.
Yeah. So the big thing is don't rely on the monitor, meaning don't rely on yourself to get too hot before you try to cool yourself down. Preemptively try to do it based on when you know the temperature is going to rise throughout the course of the event. So it's not like a gas gauge, right? This is actually a really, really good question. It's not like a gas gauge, and when it gets empty, all of a sudden you want to fill it with gas again. Heat doesn't work like that. You want to strategize your heat mitigation protocol or whatever you're going to use based on the temperature and the environment, not necessarily what you're feeling. Because you don't have, when you're in a race environment, you don't have the best mechanisms to determine that until it's too late.
I actually have something to add to that. The last year it was this hot when Pam Smith won, she wrote a very interesting blog post about her strategies for combating the heat. I don't know if you read that, but she has all the cooling points of the body listed out. She was applying ice to all those points from the beginning of the race. And I don't know how many of you guys remember this or if you read it, but she didn't eat anything during the entire race. She drank all of her calories because she knew that it was going to be so hot that she would. If you guys have problems with vomiting, I mean, I don't know if you're going to change your race strategy now, but I found that fascinating that worked for her.
And I thought the other thing she mentioned that was unfair is that she could put ice in her bra. So I thought I didn't feel like I should have to wear a bra.
Guys can do that. I mean, she
Well,
was
it's
like,
true.
yeah.
So, you know, there are some advantages here, you know, I'd like to point out. But, I had a question that kind of combines what you two both presented. Do you think that those phosphatidylcholines could be increased or decreased, you know, based on training? Like, has anybody ever looked at like, okay, here's a runner one year and here's a runner another year, and they proved, did they have a higher level?
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in looking at that. I think that we should actually correlate the levels of the phosphatidylcholines with the number of miles put in training. I think that my suspicion is that there's going to be like somewhat of a direct correlation, but we haven't shown that yet.
I think in
But
Metabolomics phase 3.
That would be really interesting to look at. We could probably even do that this year with the questionnaire. So yeah.
Great. Any other question back there?
Yeah, in part of your studies, have you looked at the hemocritic ultra runners? Their hemocritic, well, how's that compared to like the marathon runners? You know, the higher you are in the high 40s, you know, it helps quite a bit to have a high concentration of red blood cells.
Yeah, I'm sure it would, but I don't know that anybody's ever done it specifically for ultramarathon
and
runners.
we're going to have those results this year because we're getting hemoglobin after the race. So we're going to be able to look at that.
Yeah. Again, like Jason said, you know, there's there's a ton of stuff out there that you would think, and it's might have been done in another area that just hasn't even been looked at. Some of the low-lying fruit's been researched now over the last, 7 years, but it's just the basic, the most low-lying stuff. I mean, there's a lot more, data that can be obtained. There's some question? Anybody else? Yeah.
I'd be interested in actually any of yours, but especially yours since you mentioned it, the sub 2-hour project. Any thoughts you had on it?
Man, that's a whole big can of worms to start unpacking. So the nickel version, the nickel version of the can of worms is, I think that it's great for the progression of running in terms of what we understand about how runners function and how to help runners to optimally train and race. I think it's great for that. I think it was a huge win for Nike on the marketing side of it. I don't think anybody can deny that. And whether you think it was a good tactic or bad tactic or whatever, that it was a big windfall for them. There's obviously things that tangents that are related to that marketing strategy. But from a coaching standpoint, I always like to look at things that can uncover how we can make athletes better. And I think that study definitely did some of that. And in effort of full disclosure, I'm a little bit biased on this because one of my college professors produced some of the background research that went into that whole effort. But even if I did not have that biased opinion, I think I would still come to the same conclusion. It just helps us as coaches. And you will see in major marathons in the future that drafting formation that they utilize there. You might not see Teslas with big scoreboards on them. You will certainly see the drafting formation start to become a bigger part of major marathons.
All right, well, with that,
Tracy, just quickly on the choline, is that something that you're, if you could go over that, is that something that's inherent? Do you have a level of choline, or is that something?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because it's actually genetic, how quickly you use choline, and there are certain sort of genetic variants that predispose you to becoming deficient in choline faster. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something that you could get tested, what your choline level is. I've actually started taking choline supplement. Started doing this study. I don't know if it's helped or not, but
make you learn Danish in 6 weeks. Yeah.
Water intake can be critical through this race. Has there been any studies testing the natural flowing water in the mountain? And is it reasonably safe? I think the rundown at the moment is going to make for more fresh water from the mountain. Giardiasis,
Well,
gastrointestinal science.
I don't know the answer to that. Craig could probably maybe answer that, but I will say what I did hear one time when I ran Western States, that if you absolutely need some water, you can drink it, and when you get Giardia later, you can take antibiotics. Don't worry about it.
I'm actually more worried about the heavy metals that are in it
Yeah.
from all the fracking of gold, because they used to use mercury to frack the gold, and that's another study that I wanted to do, but I don't know if that's how much sense. But I don't know if Craig can talk about
Craig,
that.
you know anything about
I don't know if this is good or bad, but Gordy's been drinking it forever.
That explains a lot.
All right. Well, with that, we appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we appreciate you being here.